everyone, and especially you. Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Monday, unfortunately, June the 5th, 2023. I'm Simon Rafe, here with my two co-hosts, Carl Copey and Christine Niles. Good to have you with us both. And joining us today as the infamous guest host is Nick Wiley. Hey, Nick, how you doing?
What's up, Simon?
Good, good. Big tech and online censorship. The censorship of conservatives has been a major concern for years. Things particularly got bad on that front during the lockdowns. With recent news on that front, is there a cause for hope, or will the censoring only get worse? Now, we'll be getting into that later in the show, but first of all, we're talking with one of our reporters, the inestimable Dr. William Mahoney, about a recent announcement from YouTube. Hey, B, tell us more about this.
Hi, Simon. Thank you. Yeah, on Friday, YouTube announced it's reversing its policy regarding the 2020 election. You are now free to say on their platform without censorship that it was fraudulent if you want to. Plus, all previous elections up until that point, they had a nice statement about how it was important for democracy and all that we have open conversation about elections, especially during election season. So they've completely switched gears on that, and you are now allowed to talk about that freely.
Wow, okay, so I could in fact say that, you know, Truman beat Dewey, or the other way around, or something like that. Well, I mean, this is obviously joking about that there, but really kind of the only election that people have actually sort of been seriously advancing the theory that it was stolen, fraudulent, suspect, whatever, was the 2020 election. That was the big one. There was obviously some sort of small chatter on the left that the 2016 election was illegitimate, but that seemed to basically boil down to the fact that our preferred candidate didn't win. But I mean, the 2020 election, there was litigation, there was many reports, it was a whole thing. So it does seem that their change of position is, you know, they're just kind of saying, well, you can say it about any election, but it's like, yeah, okay, YouTube, we know which election you're talking about. There's only one that we're really talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And it's like it's kind of too little too late now that it's 2023, right? How much time has passed? So what's the point of talking about it now? Nothing can be done. You know, as we know, when it was going on, none of the courts would accept that, would hear any of the cases because of standing. They would say that it had no standing. But at this point, you're 3 years into it. We're coming up on 2024. I mean, okay, thanks for letting us talk about it now. So it's really after the fact, too little, too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, B, do you think it'll be an unbridled thing? Like you can say anything about last election, or is it just more of like you can call some things into question and say it a little bit? Is it going to be something that like we can just out and say it as much as you want, state any facts you want about it? Do you think it's going to be partial censorship, or just like completely like it's up for grabs?
Well, the way they describe it, it sounds like it's pretty much you can say what you want. They make it clear that they think that you're full of nonsense if you say the 2020 election was fraudulent in any way, but they seem like they're now going to let you say it freely. How far that goes into what you're allowed to say about the January 6th, what they call riots on mainstream media, that I don't know. But I think as far as the elections is concerned, you can say what you like, but we'll see. They flip-flop a lot, so.
Yeah, small win for now, but we'll see if it's just something that's going to be a gotcha moment later, where they bring it back and now they're kicking everybody off. Because I mean, recently we got flagged for a week for a video we made 3 years ago, and so yeah, I mean, this could be something like, oh, we'll let you talk about the election, then when the 2024 election comes around, all of a sudden, ooh, you talked about that last one? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what they do.
I have a question about what underlies the intentions of YouTube, because obviously they don't do anything without self-interest in mind. And a couple days ago, Elon Musk retweeted this tweet from Twitter Daily News. It says a number of political shows and podcasts have announced their intention to upload on Twitter in place of YouTube. This new move by YouTube may be intended to stem the bleeding. And we know one of the most high-profile cases was that of Matt Walsh of Daily Wire. He was demonetized on YouTube, and so he made this big announcement a few weeks ago that, okay, I'm not airing anything on YouTube anymore. I'm going to air everything on Twitter. I'm going to make all my shows free, and they just recently aired What is a Woman, his documentary on Twitter, and that's to great success. So do you think that this might be something behind YouTube's sudden announcement? Because they are losing money over their censorship.
Yeah, I mean, I think 100%. I think that's probably, if not the entire answer, that's a huge part of it, because they like you say, I mean, they clearly are not interested in help serving people. They want to serve themselves and stuff up their, their bank accounts. It's pretty obvious. So yeah, I think that's a huge part. I saw another comment, I think it was on Twitter News, and it said that because of Elon Musk also allowing more free speech on Twitter, they also see that that's killing them as far as competition. So now they want to put themselves out there as, oh, we're all for free speech now. So I think, yeah, that's a huge element of it.
It's interesting, too, that they only address so-called election misinformation, that they'll stop censoring, but they don't say anything about COVID or the vaccines or transgender, LGBT. So presumably those things are still censored.
I would think so, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, they're very careful of what you're allowed to say, these thought police.
Right.
Yeah, B, so that's like a very interesting thing that, that obviously, is this going to be a situation, as we kind of saw when Elon Musk took over Twitter, and he, initially in the first few days, he was making these noises and statements about this great opening of freedom of speech there. And there wasn't really anything specific there, but people really pushed the envelope in what they were doing. And some things were not banned, and some things were allowed to stand that previously, under the previous regime, would have been cancelled. But there was a lot of stuff that still sort of fell foul of the censors. Is it possible that some of this stuff is kind of like a stalking horse at this point? It's like, yeah, we're going to let you say whatever you like about the election, but, that's going to open the floodgates to people maybe saying other things that are maybe not even related to the election. They just kind of get a head full of this idea of, oh, freedom of speech on YouTube, and then it's like, bang, hammer comes down.
I mean, honestly, if you think about it, even the very fact that they're saying you can now talk about this thing that you weren't allowed to talk about, it sets it up that they have control over what you can talk about already. So now they're freeing you, but I was already free to say what I wanted about those things. You're the one on your platform who said I couldn't, and now you're telling me I can. I mean, it's something like, I don't know, it almost feels like kind of mafia insurance or something. Nothing's going to happen to your store if you give me $50 a month, and then if you don't, they smash your window, and so on and so forth. It seems like something like that almost is going on to me.
Yeah, there is that sort of protection rackety element to it. Yeah, it's just sort of bizarre. It's like, hey, it's a nice channel you've got here. It's a nice monetization you've got here. Yeah. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. But I think that this has been, kind of to the point that Christine made, this has been an issue for YouTube for a while now, some months now, that they've been losing revenue and losing market share to other forms of social media. Obviously, YouTube, was like the first video sharing platform, quite infamously started just after an incident at the Super Bowl, and one of the guys who started it was saying, well, it's ridiculous that I can't go somewhere to immediately get this video, and that's what he wanted to do. The initial impetus was a desire just to sort of be able to have instant kind of citizen journalist access to materials, but they've been now losing out to things like TikTok, Snapchat, various Instagram platforms, and now, of course, Twitter. It is always the case that, every single social media outfit, has its day, it grows, and then they slink down. For those of you who don't think I'm right, I ask you, what did you last do with your MySpace page? There we go. Anyway, always a pleasure to talk to you, B. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we will see you later in the week.
Okay, see you.
All right, so censorship on social media. I mean, I know that you lot are far more active on social media than me. I don't really use it for anything. I have my one censorship story, which is when, at the height of the monkeypox thing, remember monkeypox? Yes. Remember monkeypox, it was great. But there was the height of the monkeypox thing, and I was on Twitter, and there was a whole discussion about the fact that, that it had been forbidden to call it homopox, that had been a thing that Twitter had refused to call it, and so people were searching around for an alternative, and I suggested groomerpox, and I was banned for 24 hours, and I was deeply, deeply saddened by that, because I thought that was a good joke. But other than that, no. So what do you guys think about the censorship thing?
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing about these digital gatekeepers, right? Like, you can say this now, but you couldn't say it before. I mean, we had 2 years, right, with just in terms of what you could and couldn't say about election, so-called denialism. You had 2 years, specifically on YouTube, where you had tens of thousands of videos getting banned, just getting taken away and, never to see the light of day again, or maybe you went to some other platform like Rumble or BitChute or whatever, and you could post them there. But, thousands and thousands of unique voices, citizens journalism type of stuff getting banned out there, which, it's unfortunate because, YouTube, for better or for worse, it's the leader in terms of this platform. It's like everything's kind of curated right there. It has a personal algorithm for you, and it knows what you like. And so, for better or worse, many of us have to work with it until there's some alternative out there.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who have not been living under a rock for the past few years, it's very obvious that there's been a conglomerate of big tech, big media censorship. That's not just YouTube, it's also Google, it's also Facebook, it's also Twitter. Regardless of what people might think about Elon Musk personally or his ideology, whatever it is, the fact that he took over Twitter has been one of the greatest boons for many conservatives. He was the one who encouraged independent journalists to expose and release these massive exposés, tens of thousands of emails from former Twitter trust and safety executives colluding with the federal government, with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security and the CDC in cracking down on truthful information about COVID, about the elections. Facebook, we have emails from Facebook admitting there are lawsuits right now against the Biden administration, like multiple lawsuits now over the censorship. And these emails, tens of thousands, revealing that Facebook even admitted, yes, we actually censored truthful content for the sake of this agenda. They admit that. We have people in Twitter also admitting the same thing. Okay, it's mostly true, but we're going to censor this anyway. It's even the Hunter Biden laptop story. That again, Biden administration working with big tech and big media to censor a truthful story that now everybody is admitting, yes, the Hunter Biden laptop story is true, it's accurate, that it's not a hoax or anything like that. And yet, do you remember Twitter censored New York Post for 2 weeks, and they said you can have your account back if you delete your offending post? And good for New York Post, standing on principle and saying we're not deleting it because it's true. And so they refused to delete it, and then they finally reversed. And Jack Dorsey, former CEO, actually came out and said, we made a mistake. So.
Yeah, and it still continues at Twitter to this day because Ella Irwin, she was the head of trust and safety. She quit over the "What Is a Woman" documentary that they just aired on Twitter because the employees of Twitter basically told Daily Wire, "Hey, you know what? We're actually not going to let you do all this." And then it came out that Elon was like, "Okay, yeah, we're going to let you do it, but it's kind of going to be shadow banned in a little way." And then eventually Elon himself tweeted it out once they put it out.
Lifted the bans.
Yeah, he lifted the bans, and so then it got over 100 million views, and so it worked out really well. But it's still every day it's a different thing because so me personally, the other day I got banned for the day on Twitter for a tweet because I tweeted back at Joe Biden on June 1st when he was wishing America happy Pride Month, and I said homosexuality is not only utterly repulsive, it destroys societies. It should be criminalized worldwide and once again recognized as a disorder. So I tweeted that one on my profile itself, and then two directly at Joe Biden. It is still on my profile itself, but the tweet that I sent to Joe Biden was taken down and I was suspended almost instantly, within like 5 seconds.
What was the explanation? What did they say?
I was making hateful comments toward, basically without the long paragraph, I was making hateful comments toward a protected class because of their race, religion, or sexual orientation. But if somebody was to the same thing to me and I would have said, oh, that offends my religion, they of course would not have gotten banned. And so, the guys at the White House are on Joe's replies instantly to see what people are saying to him.
Yeah, I think obviously that probably what you've got in that scenario is you would have the Secret Service monitoring things at the president and other protectees. You would have a degree of people monitoring that. It's just somewhat disturbing that doesn't get to a thing. It's not like you don't have a file in Langley. You've got a ban from Twitter. That's the kind of the disturbing thing there. That this isn't a question of, okay, we're reviewing these replies to see, do these rise to the level of criminality? Do these rise to the level of a threat, a danger? It's like, no, we just don't like this from a policy perspective. Okay, that does become very, very concerning. Because obviously, look, we've got this situation of the First Amendment within the United States. And the First Amendment, and I'm going to say this, Probably our audience gets it, but then maybe there's obviously some people, if we don't get banned on Twitter for this, banned on YouTube for this, there's probably some people on YouTube who are going to see it. I saw a recent article that had a poll and a study had been done. The level of utter ignorance about what the First Amendment actually protects. The First Amendment protects speech and seen. It doesn't protect non-hate speech. It doesn't protect non-threatening speech. It doesn't protect speech which is proven to be true. It doesn't protect speech that is broadly considered to be within the scientific consensus. It protects speech, period. There are very, very, very limited and narrow times when the First Amendment can be abnegated, shoved aside, dealt with, all of that sort of stuff. Every single one, it's kind of that standard Supreme Court measure of, compelling government interest and the least restrictive way of doing it. The First Amendment protects your right to speak freely, means the government is not allowed to censor you. That's why we won in Baltimore. You can fight City Hall, it just costs $500,000. But obviously a private organization like YouTube is entirely at liberty to ban you, to deplatform you, to disallow certain kinds of speech, all of these kind of things. The big problem is, as you said, Christine, when you've got this collusion revealed, suddenly at that point, the private organization is not acting as a private organization. It is acting at the behest of and as an agent of the government. And, oh, you just rang the First Amendment cherries.
That's exactly right. No, that is exactly right. Because Twitter has tried to use that argument saying, well, we're a private company. We can do whatever we want. We don't have to, because we're not the government. Well, the problem is you have tens of thousands of emails showing that you're actually colluding with the federal government, and not just colluding, but you're acting under pressure by the federal government, because the government has come back saying, oh, we didn't force them to do it. Well, actually, you kind of did when you've got an FBI agent going to you and saying, this is misinformation. We think it would be a really good idea, hint, hint, if you, delete this. Well, I mean, if you've got an FBI agent breathing down your neck, there's certain coercion there, and they did exactly what they told them to do. They did exactly what they told them to do in almost all of the cases. So at that point, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, they are acting as an arm of the federal government, and that's why the Biden administration is getting sued.
There's a deeper fear of that, and this is kind of like a bit of a ha-ha funny, but okay, so there is a very famous example from within the Batman animated series where the Joker refuses to go up against the IRS. Apparently he's going to be there, and the Joker is going to get done for tax fraud, and the Joker capitulates, and he pays his taxes, and it's like, you're the Joker. And he says, I am crazy, not stupid. I am not going up against the IRS. Matt Taibbi, who was the journalist who exposed the Twitter files, he didn't have the FBI come around and knock on his door. He had the IRS. If you remember, the IRS were the people who got Al Capone that nobody else could get. The IRS, they can go after you. There is no double jeopardy in the IRS, and the burden of proof is on you, not the other way around. That is what, when you want to really get somebody, you throw the IRS at them. Because, the FBI kind of have to play by some rules. The IRS, they are a lawless terror.
Yeah, and
I'm going to get banned on YouTube for that, aren't I?
As someone who obviously went to law school, and I studied First Amendment law very intensely, I took an entire course just studying First Amendment law. A lot of people today do not understand the extent of the freedoms protected under the First Amendment. Now, I understand there's a wider debate among Catholics whether or not free speech is a good thing, according to Catholic tradition. I don't want to get into all that right now. I simply want to focus on what we have under the U.S. Constitution, which governs our laws, and we live here. So, First Amendment only bans, as you mentioned, a very narrow, swath of speech. For instance, yelling fire in a crowded theater because you cause a stampede and then there's people getting hurt. Anything that causes imminent danger, then it's appropriate for the government to ban that kind of speech. If you're outside, you're causing all sorts of disturbance to your neighbors, making all sorts of noise. Well, then the city has the right to put in noise ordinances, because free speech also protects demonstrations, expressions, because that's an expression of free speech. So that's why you protest. But also the protests have to be peaceful. They have to follow certain. So there are certain restrictions that are okay. But that's pretty much it. Now, obviously, you can't publish slander and defamation that really destroys someone's reputation. But at the same time, those laws are also very broad and depends on whether you're a public figure or a private figure. And so for a public figure, you can say almost anything you want about the public figure, whether you're in the press or whatever, and you are most of the time protected, not all the time, but most of the time. People, like I said, may disagree with that, but those are the laws in this country. And a lot of people today, especially the younger generation, they actually don't understand that because they're so used to the leftist censorship. They think, oh no, hate speech has to be banned, and anything that basically you disagree with is banned that offends me. And I don't agree with Voltaire on most of what he's written. I think a lot because he's an Enlightenment philosopher, but there's one very famous phrase of his. He says, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And that really sums up what free speech is about and what those who support free speech are about. I disagree with what you say, but it doesn't matter if it offends me. You have the right to say it.
So interestingly on that one, so we, as I said, we went to bat with Baltimore over our rally. So we had our rally there in Baltimore because of the USCCB meeting, and we wanted to have it there. And the USCCB kind of colluded with the government of Baltimore, and Baltimore came and banned us from being at this place. And anyway, we went and we won $500,000 later. Anyway, our lawyer was Mark Randazza, who is quite well known within the freedom of speech lawyer world, and he's a rough and ready character, let's say. And I saw a wonderful exchange on Twitter that he had with somebody where somebody said to him, Mark, why are you always defending scoundrels? And I was like, well, first of all, you've insulted my entire race of people, but yes. But he said, why are you always defending scoundrels? And Randazza said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, because the coercive laws against speech are first used against scoundrels, and unless you defend it there, they will come for you. And that's the same kind of Voltaire thing. It's like, that Mark Randazza has obviously gone and defended a whole bunch of terrible people, that in many ways we'd be like, oh my gosh, I just wish you people would shut up. You're saying nothing good. You're saying it would be better for the world if you were silent. But, okay, again, this is the world in which you live, and you've got to defend the First Amendment.
Yeah, Alan Dershowitz, too, who is a liberal, but he has integrity because he is willing to go to bat for conservatives who completely are on the other spectrum of political ideology, because he is, like Mark, a free speech, absolutist. He believes, hey, you have the right protected under the Constitution. I'm going to defend you, even if I completely disagree with where you're coming from.
And somehow it's become a conservative value. That's the crazy thing, is like Elon Musk is now a far right person because the left will say things like that about him because he defends free speech. It's not like he's still got a ton of other problems about him, but because he defends free speech, he's like a far right terrorist now. It's absolutely wild that just this basic fundamental right in the Constitution now makes you a crazy person. It's just like the whole thing of, the statistics of like people who fly flags. Like if you fly a flag, it's like an 80% chance you're a Republican. Just like basic little things in the United States. Like if you care about the country at all, you're somehow automatically in the conservative far right.
Yeah.
And, I just wanted to point out something specifically with YouTube's, recent allowance or whatever, the election stuff. And, this is actually a statement from YouTube talking about, they're being asked, well, why are you doing this now type of thing, and this is their kind of response. YouTube says, well, curtailing political speech without any meaningful reduction of the risk of violence or other real-world harm, they weren't seeing that. It's like, how are you measuring how much violence is coming from whatever video is out there? What's your metric there, YouTube? Are you measuring Antifa, BLM violence?
Yeah.
Or is it just, whatever you consider with the January 6th?
With the January 6th people. It is just, it's utterly bizarre as well. It sounds like it's like they were actually making the intent of saying, okay, well, we will curtail the speech in order to have a more peaceful world, which is like, okay, I give you, what was that, Ben Franklin on liberty and security, and he'll have neither. But again, it's like, really, how are you going to measure that? You're just going to come along and just say, well, there's less violence once we stop this video, and then we allowed this video back and there was more violence? Are you polling people? You know, at a riot, you know, in between throwing bricks, could you just, you know, hey, could you just fill out this little survey on YouTube?
Videos did you watch?
Yeah,
exactly?
yeah. You know, well, I see it. You know, it comes along and it says, you know, you watch this video. You know, you watch this video, rate it out of, you know, stars 1 to 5. Is this like a thing of like, watch this video, how much violence did you commit as a direct result of watching this video? You know,
here's the thing.
50%.
The leftist, the whole leftist woke crowd has redefined violence to also mean violence by what you say. So simply what I say could be causing violence. You know, it could be.
It's a microaggression.
It's a
Yeah,
microaggression.
exactly. But
Well, they started out by saying that, you know, that silence was violence, if you remember. So now it's silence is violence and speech is violence. So it's basically if you don't say exactly what I want you to say, you're violent.
Yeah.
And it's like,
damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's just can't win. But I actually wanted to read a few quotes from a lawsuit, ongoing lawsuit right now. It's called Biden v. Missouri. Like I said, there are multiple lawsuits cropping up against the Biden administration in light of all these emails showing that Biden's administration colluded with big tech to censor all these voices. So you've actually got a group of injured individuals who are suing Biden because they said their collusion prevented us from getting our message out. We were injured by we have proof, medical proof we were injured. We tried to get it out. They censored us. And so they're suing. But there's another one, Biden v. Missouri, where the Missouri AG is actually suing the federal government. And the federal judge who's presiding over the case made very clear his deep concerns over the federal government's actions. He actually asked during oral arguments whether the Biden attorneys had read Orwell's 1984. Because he said there are so many similarities between what you're doing and what that not. So he said, read the book. And then this is what is interesting. He asked the attorney, Biden's attorney, if an American citizen questioning the safety or efficacy of masks or the vaccine was protected under the First Amendment. That should be a simple answer. The Biden attorney said, well, it could be protected, but it often will not be. Then the judge says, okay, well, does the First Amendment cover Americans' right to say, for instance, that Biden is responsible for high gas prices and inflation? Their response, not a yes, simply, it depends. And then he asks, does the First Amendment protect Americans' right to say that the 2020 election was stolen? Again, their response, the Biden attorney said, well, it depends. I mean, it really is scary, the extent of censorship that these people want to impose on just average Americans.
Yeah.
So
We are holding on by the thread of a few Trump-appointed judges.
I know.
That is the scariness of, like, they're just waiting for these people to resign, die out, something like that, because if they can get in their judges, everything is screwed.
yeah.
Yep.
It's that, well, I mean, of course, and that is why, you know, obviously, as Barack Obama famously said, you know, in, I think it was 2009, it was shortly after he'd taken office for the first time, you know, elections have consequences. He said it to the late John McCain, you know, because John McCain famously lost and McCain was there trying to argue for some policy position. Barack said, nope. Elections have consequences, John. And yes, elections have consequences. And obviously, we saw the appointment of a large number of Trump judges during the Trump period. I mean, he famously appointed a very large number of federal judges and 3 judges to the Supreme Court. You know, so obviously, hopefully, that will be some degree of bulwark against it there. But yeah, absolutely. This is why all of this stuff with regard to the elections, with regard to election integrity efforts, with regard to the ability to say, you know, that maybe the election was fraudulent, stolen, there were concerns, whatever, the ability to say that about the 2020 election so that you can also make some efforts to make sure that that doesn't happen for 2024. You know, when you look at like the individual races for the Senate, you know, it's no good having the president there if he's got to fight tooth and nail in order to get appointees through the Senate, you know, if the Senate split, you know, 50-50 or something like that. So this, of course, is a very important thing, you know, with regard to that. But you were kind of censored, but not by YouTube or Twitter or something. You were actually censored by a Catholic school, kind of.
Yes. Unfortunately, yeah, I didn't have to tweet anything. Actually, it involved YouTube because I showed a YouTube video that simply quoted a saint that referred to the people that he was converting as pagans and savages. And I've told the story a few times here at Church Militant. Go check it out. It's fired for quoting a Saint on our website. Go search that up if you want to hear the whole story. But yeah, I was reprimanded almost immediately the day I said the thing. I taught it in all my classes that day, which I thought was fine and nuanced, and I had conversations with different students about it, and I thought everything was good. But the administration pulled me in as I was leaving and basically said I was, eventually what the verbiage on my termination letter was that I was being insensitive and I was racist, actually.
Racist? Wow, yeah. Well, I think, the definition of racism is, as it's usually done, is the belief that certain races, however you want to define that, have certain immutable characteristics. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to define race, as people often do, as not merely some kind of biological distinctiveness, but you're going to describe it culturally, it's like, yes, a pagan people are pagan. That is like, it's right within there. I mean, if you're going to come along and say that there are certain immutable characteristics, within a pagan people, yes. The moment they stop being pagan, then they stop being pagan. Stop me if this is too complicated for anyone. Yeah, it's dumb. I mean, we should be allowed to say things that are controversial, that people disagree with, because that's how discussions happen. The response to it, and it's a very interesting thing that when you see some of these people who have lived within this bubble of not being allowed dissenting opinions, when they're exposed to dissenting opinions and they don't have the ability to have somebody shut it down, it's like, okay, you've got to face it. Either they, utterly retreat from it, or in many cases they're like, oh, nobody ever said this to me, and they're suddenly converted. Their minds are suddenly changed, which I think is the danger to the left, in that their ideas will not stand scrutiny.
Yeah, and just sort of going off of your experience being censored by your school and then kicked out, switching gears momentarily to the issue of censorship in the church. We're not talking about the government anymore, but we do know so many cases of bishops censoring their own priests because they don't want the complaints, they don't want the controversy, and so many priests everywhere are muzzled. They can't say the truth robustly. For instance, talk about contraception. In so many dioceses, priests they're not able to say anything about it because then the bishop gets all sorts of complaints, and the bishop's like, I don't want this, I know Michael Voris at one point when he was coming back to the faith was considering joining the priesthood, and he was rejected, and now he looks back, he's like, thank God I was rejected, because if I'd become a priest, 90% of what I say, 99% of what I say wouldn't have been allowed to be said. So obviously, we can't be censored here. It's one of the great things about independent media. We're not beholden to the bishops or anything like that. We just speak the truth without fearing that some bishop's going to crack down and say, you're not allowed to say that. But there is the instance of too much censorship by bishops who don't support their priest in speaking the truth robustly, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that what's got to be considered with that, it's an interesting one, because we all know good priests who do say these things and who have not got cancelled for it. So like in my particular parish, the priests, as I've said on Hardline, it was the first Hardline episode I did, homilies about abortion and contraception I really don't feel have much place, because that's not for the homily to be. But speaking the truth, okay, so my parish has a great and vibrant music program, and we have a wonderful orchestra which is gathered from southeast Detroit, and these wonderful musicians, a large number of whom are Jewish. A large number of these musicians who come in to play the masses are Jewish. And so normally during the homily they all go outside, all the musicians, to have a cigarette, because when you're blowing a woodwind, clearly putting carcinogens into your lungs is like the way to go. I'm not a musician, I don't judge them, but one day it was absolutely bitterly cold over the winter and they couldn't go outside. It was perishingly cold, horribly cold. And so they stayed in there, and the priest gave this absolutely strident homily that was essentially like why the Jews are wrong. It was around Christmas time, and it was basically like you Jews are wrong. And I'm like, okay, so what you've got there is you've got a statement, you've got a homily coming out to these people, to a large number of people in the audience who it's going to be absolutely horribly offensive to, and there was no complaints, no pushback, no nothing, because you know what? I think people know, what you're getting into when you go to my parish. So many of these complaints, in many ways, it's like, oh, somebody might be offended, so let's not do it. Well, the bishop might come crack down on me, so I'm not going to say anything. And it's like, have a little bit of a spine. Mm-hmm. Show some guts, show some grit. come out there and say it. Fine, if you get cut off at the knees, you got cut off at the knees, you've learned something. But I honestly think priests and bishops would be surprised if they actually let the truth out there. People will be like, oh, you know what? I'm offended by it, but you know what? I kind of knew what I was getting into when I walked into a Catholic church.
Because the last thing that people want in all these spaces is actually to dialogue with people. It's either we want that idea suppressed, can't even talk about it at all, or there's the other time when I hate also, where people will hear these different things said that they obviously disagree with, and they just sit there and take it, and then they say nothing about it after. Like, I'd rather have like the dialogue, like just have those disagreements, have those talks, come to the truth. Like, I know, like Michael went and gave this presentation this past weekend in Idaho.
Oh my gosh, that is so good.
A mostly Protestant peoples, all these conservative people. But just we have video of many different people walking out because they didn't want to hear, because he was, oh man, he was just completely, I mean, it's on the Vortex.
Yeah, it's the Vortex today, isn't it?
It's the Vortex today,
Oh
where he just goes at every little bit of Protestantism and talks about how you need to be Catholic and all that, and it's just fantastic. But a lot of people leaving, and there were arguments after, and that is amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. Rather than just like be like, oh, you know, that guy is really controversial, he can't come speak here, or the other side of everybody just sits there and everybody hated it, but nobody wants to say anything about it. There were like genuine arguments and things after, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And we should clarify, too, that the reason Michael's doing that is not because he just wants to stir up controversy. The reason he's doing that is because he cares about souls. Mm-hmm. He wants to save souls. That's the mission of this apostolate, Church Militant. It's the salvation of souls. Now, we each may have different methods of doing that. My method of reaching Protestants is very different from Michael's method, but I think we need both. Mm-hmm. And so when Michael is up there preaching very boldly about this sort of thing, and arguments are erupting, you know, sometimes the truth can come out of those arguments, and that's what he's wanting to happen. Because why? He wants them to know the fullness of the faith, the fullness of truth, the glories of the Catholic faith. Why? So that they can be happier in this life and in the next to spend eternity with God. Ultimately, that's what it's about. It's love of souls, and not just, oh, I just want to get up there and just cause all sorts of fireworks because I'm just a troublemaker. That's not what it's about.
I think that as well, if you can say there's something more fundamental than love of souls, there's a duty to the truth. And that's an important thing that, you know, you're using as an example, Nick, this wonderful talk that he gave in Idaho, which, again, everyone needs to, when they finish watching the download, if you haven't seen it, you need to go and do it, you know, carve out time. I had like 2 members of staff today who apologized for turning up late because they were watching the Vortex today, because they were just so engrossed with it. And I was like, yeah, it's okay, it's all right. But I think there's a duty to the truth. So to your point of like, okay, everyone's just like, oh, well, you know, I disagree with them, but I'm just going to sit there and take it, okay? We should be willing to stand up for I hate the expression, but our personal truth. The thing that we believe to be true, we should be willing to stand up for it, argue it with somebody who believes something completely opposite to us, and maybe you'll convince each other, maybe you won't, maybe you'll come to a greater understanding, but the dialogue is important. Yes, absolutely, 100%. Where your eternal destiny is with regard to religion, that is the most important thing in the entire universe. But you know what? Summer is coming, and you're going to be sitting around a barbecue, and you're going to be debating the designated hitter in baseball. You're going to be debating that issue, and you should be willing to debate that issue, or whether or not, you know, that your football team was right to sign this particular quarterback, or whether or not, you know, that Mike Pence, who just apparently declared today, was this a sensible political move for him to have declared? These are issues that relate to, is this true or not? You know, what do we think? And you come to a greater understanding of people. And yeah, absolutely, 100%, Christine. Evangelization is the most important thing. But there are plenty of other things that are important too, even baseball.
The duty to the truth it really strikes me, because this actually came up in a recent interview between Jordan Peterson and Matt Walsh, who we mentioned, you know, departed with YouTube recently, and he's now on Twitter. Peterson asked about Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? And he's like, well, he asked Walsh straight up. He's like, why is this such an important issue to you? Why are you going around? Why did you make this documentary? Why are you asking this most fundamental question? happen. And Peterson sort of answers his own question. He's like, I know there's issues with mutilation of children, right? We don't want that happening. But let's just imagine, and Walsh is like concedes that. He's like, yeah, kids are getting mutilated, all this bad stuff is happening. But at the end of the day, Walsh says, it's not even about that. This stuff might not even be happening. Like if the gender mutilation wasn't happening, genital mutilation wasn't happening, what would happen? Would you still fight this fight? And Walsh says yes, because this is a fundamental objective truth that's being challenged. You can't change your sexuality. He's like, that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, like, only the truth truly has a right. And to bring this into the Catholic perspective of the whole First Amendment debate with free speech and all. So the church, and I don't think anyone is. No one is a free speech absolutist at the end of the day. I don't truly believe it. People can say whatever they want, like, oh, free speech this, free speech that. I don't think that they are. And if they are, I feel terribly for them, and I think they're terribly wrong. But so Pope Leo XIII is the boldest to speak about this in his encyclical Libertas. And there are tons of great stuff there, but just in one little paragraph of it, he says, men have a right freely and prudently to propagate throughout the state what things soever are true and honorable. So true and honorable always has a right. You always have the ability to tell the truth, to help bring people to virtue. That state can't do anything about. And then he says, so that as many as possible may possess those things. But lying opinions, those which no mental plague is greater, and vices which corrupt the heart and moral life should be diligently repressed by public authority, lest they insidiously work the ruin of the state. And so it doesn't mean just like little white lies or anything like that. It's not these little things that are up for debate, or just absolutist, like, you know what, nothing that you say that's wrong can ever be said or you're going to go to jail. Like, it's not that. It's these fundamental things that automatically destroy a society. When a man can say he's a woman or something like that, like things like that, the fabric of society is completely torn. And so things like, it should not be even the least bit of a problem for people to say that we should eliminate, like, there should be total censorship of like porn and all these different things. Like, those have no rights. They ruin society. They ruin people and the dignity of the person. And so those things should not be protected as speech anywhere. These gender surgeries and things like that as well. Like, they should not be public up for debate or anything like that, just because of how ruinous they are to society. And that's what he's saying. Like, that's what the church believes, is that the authorities have the duty to suppress these things, which are just complete evil in themselves and will in fact work to the ruin of the state. Not little things. Of course, like even St. Thomas himself talks about how you can't just make everything that's a sin illegal. That would be just absolute craziness to make every little sin illegal, send everybody off to jail and all this stuff. So of course, there are things which, even though they are bad, still should be permitted should be allowed to be done, not encouraged at all, but allowed to be done in society. But there are things that are so evil that no one should be able to do anything about.
Yeah, it's a prudence issue.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just to clarify, porn is illegal. Porn is a federal offense, and you do go to prison for porn.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of people don't understand this. Hardcore porn is actually not protected under the First Amendment. People don't realize this because it's all over the place, but hardcore porn is not protected under the First Amendment. Now, softcore is, it shouldn't be, but again, this comes down to the U.S. Supreme Court, the people who've sat on the U.S. Supreme Court, who've interpreted the Constitution in a liberalizing direction. And we've seen this over the course of the 20th century. I've studied First Amendment intensely. You read these Supreme Court opinions, and they're just liberalizing and liberalizing and liberalizing the interpretation of various amendments to the Constitution in ways that the Founding Fathers never in a million years would have foreseen. Not just the pornography aspect, which is under the whole free speech First Amendment umbrella, but also, for instance, the reach of the federal government, the massive tentacles of the federal government over the states right now. The Founding Fathers would have had a heart attack over that. They never envisioned that. So yeah, a lot of the blame lies with the U.S. Supreme Court having these interpretations that they've imposed based on their sometimes anti-Catholic, very Enlightenment sort of secular views.
Well, I would kind of, while not disagreeing with you, I think there's another argument to be made that it's other branches of the government that must bear at least some responsibility for it. So you look at, obviously, the Supreme Court is interpreting, essentially the Supreme Court is interpreting a law passed by the legislature. Does it comport with the Constitution? And when you come along and you say, okay, look, we've got a law passed by a legislature that liberalizes pornography, for example, the Supreme Court goes, well, here's the Constitution. It's real short, and it says nothing about that. It just, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights says that speech, and this is speech should be free. So if y'all want to pass this inane law, I'm not authorized to strike it down. I'm not required to strike it down on constitutional grounds. And we've seen a number of rulings like that from the Supreme Court where they've effectively said, if you pass these inane laws, it is not my job to protect you from your own stupidity. That was essentially Roberts said with Obamacare. And he was like, it's not my job to protect you from something that's permitted. And, that's what we've seen. We've seen this liberalization within the legislature. That has come from a liberalization of the people. It was one of the founding fathers, I can't remember which one, said, our Constitution is suitable for the governance of a moral people.
Exactly.
And I don't think we have that anymore. I mean, that's kind of where you're at. Yeah, the founding fathers will be aghast at the country we have. I think the founding fathers will be aghast at the Americans we have these days.
Yeah, because it was just all these laws we have, somehow everything is up for public debate. Everything we could just make a law about. That's ridiculous. There are things that should totally be just off limits. It shouldn't matter if 75% of Americans support this evil thing. It should just be untouchable in the first place because it is evil, because it's going to lead to our ruin. And so the fact that we've just democratized every single thing, we could all of a sudden today we could take a poll, Simon, and we could be like, you know what, Simon shouldn't be in the United States. And we could pass a law that says Simon can't be here anymore. And all of a sudden it just is a thing, even though it makes no sense. It's ridiculous because it was just overwhelmingly popular consensus. Now we can make it into a real thing.
Yeah. It's the tyranny of the majority, isn't it?
Exactly. But so we've democratized certain things that we shouldn't, but then we've enshrined constitutional rights and taken it from democracy that we shouldn't. We did that in Roe v. Wade. We took the question of abortion, which in the beginning, it was left up to each state, and each state could vote on whether to criminalize it or not, et cetera. And if you didn't like it, your choice was go to another state. And that's how we were handling things. Of course, Roe v. Wade, the 9 Supreme Court justices took it out of the hands of the states, imposed their own sort of straitjacket ruling on all 50 states, and said, all of you must follow this from now on because we 9 justices say that you must. Actually, 72. But now, you've got gay marriage. Gay marriage before was democracy. You vote, and if you don't like it, you go move to another state. That was taken out of the states in 2015. So now everybody must honor, and obey the laws on so-called gay marriage. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting when you actually look at it. You're talking about the Enlightenment issues that have come in through the Supreme Court and stuff. I mean, I would just like to kind of remind everyone that the United States is an Enlightenment country. It's one of the few Enlightenment countries in the world. Being established there within that context, its establishment is as a new nation, conceived in liberty. But you read all of the founding documents, read all the documents coming round at that point. There's a big argument to suggest that the United States is not founded as a Christian nation, but is founded as a broadly Masonic nation. The number of people there who are influenced by that. You actually look at this sense. You previously, Christine, just had your vacation in France, and you were talking about the great Catholic tradition within France, even though the modern French Republic is founded on an explicit rejection of Catholicism. They didn't manage to break that. But whereas within the United States, because of this foundation on the rejection of the monarchy, on the rejection of all these principles, this foundation of the people as supreme, this kind of presumption of democracy being the main foundation of the power, you have essentially an Enlightenment country. And it's like, dude, less than 250 years later, this is what you're looking at. And I don't see a way that it could have gone any differently. I'm just kind of surprised it took a quarter millennium.
Yeah, it's interesting because the U.S. and the French were very influenced by one another. And as we know, in the French Revolution, you had the Freemasonic Jacobins, godless, anti-Catholic, doing all of their persecution, slaughtering Catholics, setting up the Temple of Reason in Notre Dame Cathedral, committing sacrilege, having a sexual orgy. They're all of horrible, horrible things happening. And then you have the Enlightenment, like you said, the founding of our country. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Many of the founding fathers were Freemasons. Some of them were, 33rd degree Masons with all that. I mean, if we've done an FBI on Freemasonry, it is the most condemned religious system, and it's not even religion, really, it's like a cult. It's the most condemned cult of the church. There have been more papal decrees and sickles on it than anything else. Maybe communism comes a close second. But it's interesting if you actually, when we visited Washington, D.C. last year, and we were kind of walking around, and a friend of mine gave me all sorts of information about just the layout of the city of D.C. I mean, it's laid out in tribute to Freemason, Masonic. I mean, there's Masonic symbolism everywhere. It's laid out in a certain pattern. It's fascinating. I didn't know a lot of this stuff, but at the same time, it's like terrifying at the same time. It's like, wow, this is like the founding of our nation. So, yeah.
And it's like, you got to wonder, well, what kind of kept it afloat? You have all that Freemasonic influence, which, I'm willing to admit. But I think, we've still been hanging on for a couple centuries, right? And even initially, like there was something in our inception where it's this, I guess, this kind of opposing force between, I guess, the Freemason influence, but also the Christian influence, albeit Protestant. But that couldn't not have had any effect. But as you said now, the morals that sort of religious tradition bought us are out the window now. My question is, and this is really getting back to this sort of the big tech censorship issue. We mentioned Jack Dorsey, who came out and said, we made a mistake. My question is, where's the accountability when it comes to that stuff? We could have, former CEOs saying that. We can have YouTube saying, hey, we're going to reverse our policy. But really, is there going to be any retribution? Is there going to be a bunch of people leaving the platform? It's like a vote with your feet type of thing. So, I mean, YouTube has a huge platform, right? And they have a responsibility to say, not just that you guys can say whatever you want, but they're also making claims as well. We mentioned that they're saying you can be an election denier, but it is false. It is false. You just have the right to say it now, and they're using their platform to still push that narrative.
Yeah.
With regard to accountability, it was extremely satisfying when Elon Musk took over. And the very first day, he walks in as owner, now CEO. He fires Vijaya Gadde, who was the top lawyer, and she was the one responsible for banning New York Post, banning Trump, and making all these horrible decisions. It was very deliciously satisfying to see her gone. He also sacked a bunch of other top lawyers who made some horrible decisions. Unfortunately, kept on Yoel Roth, who was head of trust and safety, and he was the one who was colluding with federal government. But then he got enormous backlash on Twitter to the point where he had to actually go into hiding because he was afraid for his life. I'm not saying that he should have been threatened, but he eventually resigned. And then, I mean, it's that to me was some accountability that a lot of us were happy with. But you're right, there's still a lot of accountability that's lacking in all this.
Yeah, because I mean, there's the smaller sites, but they can't compete at all. Like Rumble doesn't get nearly the numbers. All these other ones that are like streaming sites and all that, they don't get nearly the numbers and all. And Trump's Truth Social, nobody's really on that.
Trump's on it though.
Trump's on it, and that's where you have to go to get Trump, which is great for him. I mean, it's a great for self-promotion and all, but
except that somebody always just comes and screen grabs it and tweets it. Yeah. I mean that's the thing.
No, that is the thing. You find it out secondhand. Like there's like one person who starts the chain, I think, and then all of his people just tweet it or something. But you had to have something like this. You had to have a platform that was already so big that so many people were on that already worked, and for somebody like Elon to come in and just give you that outlet. Because I remember when I was in high school and all, Twitter was first starting to get big. I loved Twitter. I was on there all the time. And then it got really lame with all the censorship and everything like that. Everything started to suck on Twitter. And then when Elon bought it, it instantly kind of became cool again and all. And so, yeah, you needed that. But and the other big ones would be able to have that great success too if something like this were to happen. But we just haven't seen these smaller ones really break through yet that are more ample towards free speech.
Yeah, well, and this, I think, we're reaching the end of the show, but I think there's an important point to be made, and it's an important point to be made for our audience, that there's probably a lot of them that are watching this show on YouTube. Okay, or maybe they're watching it on Twitter. I don't know if we're uploading stuff to Twitter right now. I have as little as possible to do with social media. But, you're watching it there. Maybe you're watching, one of these reels or a little clip or something like that. Or even you're watching it because, somebody tweeted it at you or something like this. Okay, we have a website. We have a website that we have built and we maintain at great expense. in order that we are not censored, in order that we can do all the stuff, you will probably notice that throughout this piece, its whole like 1 hour show, if you watch it on YouTube, there will be bits where it dips to black or the audio goes away. That's because we've said something that even now cannot be said on YouTube. That's a kind of a key point. We're not censored on our site. We can't be controlled on our site. We can't be done. Please, people come to our site. One, you're not censored. Two, there's far more on our site. All the articles, they know that you write a ton of articles and you're doing all this work. All this great work that people are doing is on our site, and you can see it all there.
What's the name of the website?
Churchmilitant.com. It's not hard. Look, it's written right there, churchmilitant.com.
And I think people will have to eventually, because eventually this is going to go behind the paywall, right? Or at least part of the show.
I've got no idea. I don't make those decisions. But ultimately, yeah, look, it's certainly there is going to be, even if it doesn't go behind the paywall, don't have to pay for it, it will probably come a point where it's like, this is exclusive to our website. That like there'll be a bit of it on YouTube or whatever, but the rest of it will be exclusively on our website, because this is how you break the stranglehold of big tech. Don't be sitting there and moaning up a storm about, oh, big tech censored me and they did this and did that. I have built you a platform. I have lost sleep. I have lost hair. I have lost friends. I have spent so much money on this thing, and this is why we built it. We built it for this one purpose, so there was a place where we could come and we could say things like, Joe Biden stole the 2020 election, okay? That's the sort of thing that we came, so we could say this, right? Oh no, we get banned on YouTube left, right, and center for saying this stuff. I have a website where people can come and do it.
You can say it now.
Say it now. Well, for how long? What else can I say? What else can't I say? That's the whole thing. Say whatever I like on my website. My house, my rules. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Download, wherever you joined us, although I like you much more if you're on churchmilitant.com. Now, please join us in prayer as we beg Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Eve. Ad te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, that's churchmilitant.com, we have a website. May God bless you.